welcome to Future², the podcast all about corporate innovation and entrepreneurship. My name is Steve Gleveski, and each week I'll bring you authors, corporate innovation managers, entrepreneurs, and above all else, thought leaders on the topics of innovation, entrepreneurship, and self-improvement. Future² brings you a double dose of innovation inspiration every week to help you successfully navigate your innovation journey. Every Monday, I'll bring you a world-class thought leader such as Steve Blank, Alex Osterwalder, Neil Patel, Rand Fishkin, or Whitney Johnson, just to name a few. While every Friday, I'll bring you some quick, digestible insights myself to help end your week on a high before you head off for the weekend. Future² is proudly brought to you by Collective Campus, an innovation hub, school, and consultancy that works with large organizations to help them adopt the mindset, methodologies, and tools required to explore new business models and disruptive innovation in an era of rapid change. If your organization needs support coming up with ideas, testing and turning those ideas into reality, incubating teams, driving cultural change, or connecting and partnering with startups, then visit Collective Campus online at www.collectivecamp.us. And without further ado, here's today's podcast. Today, I'll be bringing you David Cropley. He's an associate professor in the School of Engineering at the University of South Australia. His main research focus revolves around creativity and innovation, both in technological and other contexts. Among his interests is also malevolent creativity, that is, creativity in the context of crime and terrorism. He's the author of 4 books, including Creativity in Engineering, Creativity and Crime, The Dark Side of Creativity, and Fostering Creativity, a diagnostic approach for higher education and organizations. Without further ado, I bring you David Cropley. Welcome to the show, David.
Hi, Steve. It's good to talk to you.
No, it's an absolute pleasure to have you on the program. You're joining us from Adelaide, is that right?
Yes, correct. I'm at the University of South Australia, based just in the northern suburbs of Adelaide.
Oh, fantastic. And I was actually expecting to hear more of an accent because I did look into your background. I know you spent time, you studied in Scotland probably about 15, 20 odd years ago.
Yep.
Do you want to talk to me about that?
Yeah, well, actually, it's a bit of a long story, so I'll summarise it very quickly. But
Sure.
I was born in Australia, and my family are all from Adelaide. But when I was only 4 months old, we moved initially to Canada. So I lived in Canada for about 7 years. Then basically until I was in my early 20s, then kind of moved back and forth between Germany and the United Kingdom. So my father's a professor of psychology. He worked at Hamburg University in Germany, and I went to high school in Scotland and was also in the British Navy and studied at university in England. And then I came back to Australia when I was 22.
Oh, well, there you go. That explains it. And I guess Hamburg, Hamburg being one of the more liberal sort of cities in Germany, if not Europe, I guess ties in very well with innovation, which is all about embracing the unknown and not thinking you have all the answers up front. And another thing I just wanted to quickly touch on, I know you've rowed competitively, both indoors and outdoors, and competed in several Masters games. Are you planning to compete again anytime soon?
Yeah, I've been doing that regularly now for about 12 years. So I only took it up in my mid-30s, just I'd reached that point in life where I was kind of putting on a bit of weight and not doing anything, and thought it was, now was the time to kind of find something sustainable for, to stay healthy and so on. And so I took that up, but as I've done some indoor rowing competitively and just as a regular form of exercise, and also still compete regularly on the water in masters competitions. So it's a good low impact way of keeping fit.
Yeah, definitely couldn't agree more. All right, well let's get into it. I wanted to I wanted to kick off actually by talking about the 4 Ps that you've outlined in one of your books and how they apply to innovation. Can you talk our audience through that?
Yep. So my background with respect to innovation really begins with creativity, and in fact, although I work in an engineering school, people often are a bit surprised by that. Of course, engineering design and problem solving in engineering is as much about creativity and innovation as any other line of work.
Exactly.
But the psychological background or creativity is very strongly influenced by a psychological background. It really grew up in the discipline of psychology in the 1950s and 60s. And so that's kind of the methodological or disciplinary influence that I've got, even though I'm not a psychologist.
Sure.
But I've worked, most of my work in creativity and innovation has been with psychologists. So the 4 Ps is a framework that's existed in the psychology of creativity for about 40 or 45 years. And that's really the framework that psychologists use to explain the different factors that influence creativity. So the 4 Ps include the person, and that means that we're talking about the psychological characteristics and resources of the person, including motivation and feelings and other aspects like risk aversion and so on.
Sure.
We're then talking about the press. Now, they use the term press to mean the pressure of the environment. So really that's talking about organizational culture and environment. The third factor is then, I have to always say them to myself in my head, person, press, process is the third one, the cognitive processes that refers to. And then the fourth one is really about the product, about the output of the process of creativity. So the 4 Ps are that psychological sort of lens into how creativity works and how people generate creative ideas and make use of them. So I found that a very helpful framework for then taking that and applying that to creativity as the front end of innovation. So that's where it sort of feeds into innovation.
Sure. Are you able to provide, for an example, David, of, say, a product or a business and how the 4 Ps might apply?
Yep. So when I think of product, I'm sure as a lot of your listeners do, we're talking both about tangible artifacts as well as things like services and processes and systems and so on. So product is a very broad term in the context of creativity and innovation. And the particular relationship between these 4 Ps and the outputs of innovation is that each one of those 4 Ps has a kind of influence throughout the process of innovation. So, for example, and it's not so much related to specific products as the whole process, that if you think of the cognitive processes that people use while they're engaging in innovation, there are times in that process where we have to generate lots of ideas. In other words, we're thinking very divergently.
Yes.
But there are equally, later in the process, there are points in time where we have to be very analytical and kind of choose among alternatives. And so in that case, we're thinking very convergently. So all of these 4 Ps tie into the process of innovation, that each of them has a certain requirement on the process, or places a certain requirement on the process of innovation in different ways at different times, if you want the overall process of innovation to be successful.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, and I think that aligns very, very well with the human-centered design sort of approach of collecting insights, where you're going broad with potential problems, ideating potential solutions broadly, but then narrowing them down, and it's that transition from divergent to convergent thinking that you were talking about a second ago there.
Yep.
And on psychology, I know you've done a lot of work on the psychology of innovation in organizations, and as a result of that, you've developed what you call an innovation phase assessment instrument that models innovation across 7 phases. Can you elaborate a little on what the tool is and what these 7 phases look like, David?
Yep. So that's the way that we've tied together the 4 Ps with the different stages of innovation, so along the lines of what I was describing before.
Sure.
So the IPAI, the Innovation Phase Assessment Instrument, is an instrument, so it's a survey instrument that we designed to tap into this intersection between the 4 Ps and 7 different phases of innovation. So what that gives us is kind of a matrix of different intersections of personality, motivation, the organizational climate and so on, with 7 different stages of innovation. And it allows us the instrument itself basically defines the ideal conditions and requirements for successful innovation, but not just in an overall sense, but at each separate stage of the innovation process. So what it means is that it allows us to measure, or it allows us to model innovation, say that what's good for innovation in one phase of the process may be quite different from what's good for innovation in another phase of the process. And if you want to innovate successfully, you've got to be flexible and be able to kind of oscillate back and forth to the favourable conditions at the appropriate point in time.
Yeah, that makes sense. And one example that comes to mind is Facebook. In their early days, the whole mantra of move fast and break things made a lot of sense when you're looking for product market fit. But perhaps in the later stages where you've honed in on product market fit and it's about developing that end solution, perhaps it requires a little bit more structure.
Exactly. So, in any project, whether you're looking at a sort of, grand scale or a very much shorter sort of development process, you go through those different stages where, as you described before with the human-centered design, where early on you have to be kind of open and receptive to ideas and think very divergently. But once, you get further down the track and you need to actually, develop a prototype and implement a product, then the conditions may change. And as I mentioned before, you have to perhaps start thinking much more analytically, but also you might need, for example, an organizational climate that switches over from being more relaxed and open to being much more goal-focused and much more demanding. So all of those conditions change throughout the innovation process, and the key is knowing what the right conditions are at the right time.
Right. That makes perfect sense. And I think you've also touched on this topic of furious activity versus understanding, which I suppose aligns very closely with what you've just described there, where different types of behaviors are required at different parts of the innovation lifecycle. Can you elaborate a little bit on this concept of furious activity versus understanding?
Yeah, well, that term actually came up in a study that we did that was more looking at aspects of creativity and expertise, but it does relate to the conversation about innovation as well. So we were looking, and the connotation there is that you can spend a lot of time spinning your wheels, doing activities that kind of seem to be busy and productive, but that aren't necessarily achieving the desired aim. And so it really goes back to that IPAI concept that you can invest a lot of time and effort, for example, thinking convergently, but if you're in a phase where you should be thinking divergently, then you may be burning up a lot of energy and time and money for nothing. So that's sort of that connotation of furious activity versus the expertise or the knowing what to do at the right time. So it's really just kind of contrasting that idea that you've really got to not only be capable of doing the activities, but know when you should be doing them and doing them at the right time in the right way.
Right. And I guess that lends itself to a little bit of friction then between how novices or people lower down the food chain at a large company see innovation compared to someone who, say, consider themselves experts with, say, 20, 25 years experience in a particular domain or industry. Does that then lend itself to issues when it comes to, say, Horizon 3 type of innovation, where we have top-down managers saying, well, this is what we need to develop, but as you'd be aware, when you're looking at breakthrough disruptive innovation, there's so many unknowns, and you need to be a little bit more, you need to embrace that understanding rather than that furious activity.
I think that's a challenge that a lot of organizations face, isn't it? That successful organizations have become successful for some good reason, but also their very success tends to sort of cement in place certain behaviors and things that are probably the enemy of innovation for a lot of organizations, because you try to kind of repeat the same trick, and the people who've got the 20, 25 years of expertise have invested a lot of time and effort in arriving at that point, so they've got a vested interest in sort of maintaining and using their expertise, which can sometimes make it harder to be open to the new ideas.
Correct.
And then at the other end of the spectrum, as you indicated, you've got new people coming in at the bottom of the organisation quite often who aren't sort of ingrained in the same company culture and so on, who've got new ideas but can find it difficult to sort of butt up against the entrenched views of the organisation. So I think that's an organisational cultural characteristic that can sometimes, that organisations can almost become the victims of their own success.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And I think, we see organizations putting in policies, processes, systems to help them maintain that status quo. But the unintended consequence of that is it does often kill the ability to be creative, to move quickly, to innovate. And as a result of that, we're seeing a lot of people coming up the ranks, these people lower down the food chain who maybe they're Gen Y or young Gen Xers who actually want to see change, but they're coming up against these entrenched values and therefore either striking out, joining more progressive companies, or perhaps just starting their own startups.
Yeah, it's difficult. I mean, I have the same conversations that I'm sure you do. That everybody agrees that innovation is important, but they also agree that at the same time we've got to make money and we've still got to look after our performance engines and our core lines of business. So, the trick for a lot of organisations, it's not that companies should abandon the ways that they're currently making money and become only innovative or only sort of disruptive. It's that they've got to find that sort of happy balance. And you've probably seen, as I have, a lot of people say the right mix is, say, 70-20-10. That 70% of your effort is in your current products and activities, 20% is looking for those incremental improvements, and 10% is looking for those sort of next generation paradigm-breaking ideas, but that's going to differ for every organisation. That whether it's sort of 65-25-10 or 70-20-10 or whatever it happens to be, you've got to find the right mix for your organisation.
Yeah, of course, and I think so many people kind of overlook that and they think, well, we need to be innovative and it's about applying that breakthrough or disruptive innovation approach to everything you do, which is, probably the fast track to bankruptcy and killing the company. You've those systems and policies for the core business, they're there for a reason, to keep the mothership ticking over. But at the same time, you can keep the mothership ticking over, but still put some resources towards that, as you've mentioned, the Horizon 3 disruptive innovation.
Yeah. I had a meeting with a company, electronics company here in Adelaide yesterday, and we asked them if they, we talked about the Googles and 3Ms of the world and how, they allow people a certain amount of time to look at sort of blue sky projects. And this company said that they're not doing that, but they identified very clearly that they are doing other things that have the same effect. So, it's also how you do your 20% and your 10% of the incremental and the disruptive can manifest itself in lots of different ways. It doesn't just have to be that people spend one day a week, thinking new ideas. In this case of this company, they placed more sort of time and effort on other activities that achieve the same outcome. But it also highlights, as you did, the fact that there's nothing wrong with incremental activities as well, that there's also innovation in making those better, faster, cheaper improvements, and that those are that sort of intermediate level of risk, that they're not as high risk as the purely disruptive stuff, but they're still taking you beyond your day-to-day performance engine.
Yeah. And are you able at all to share what some of these initiatives were that the electronics company was working on?
I have to think now. It was only yesterday, but they've spent some time doing off-site type activities, but not necessarily with the entire company, but with groups of people within the organisation. And I think another feature of what they were doing that I think was also very valuable for this is they place a lot of attention on further training and upskilling their staff and so on. So I think that was kind of where they chose to invest those resources that some companies put into the blue sky thinking. These guys saw the big value for them was additional training, which also then exposes those people who are doing the training to things like contact with other people in the wider field, with customers, and still an important way of feeding that innovation process.
Yeah, and how important is it that innovation in that context is actually holistic rather than, say, a set of isolated activities? I mean, training is great, but what happens when you train people and they go back to their business units and they can't actually apply, for example, rapid experimentation or fail fast?
Yeah. I like to say the same thing that I've, as I'm sure at least some of your listeners have been, on creativity workshops and so on. And one of the difficulties with those is that you go off-site and it's a different atmosphere, so you're not in your normal day-to-day environment, environmental workplace and so on. And, you have a lot of fun and try different things and so on. But when you go back into your workplace, if you go back to the same old environment, the same old boss who says, if you try any of that creativity rubbish here, you can start looking for a new job, then how creative do we think people are going to be? So, I'm kind of, I wouldn't say against, but I'm always cautious about these sort of somewhat like, separated or piecemeal approaches that you can't just send people off on a one-day course and expect them to come back and suddenly that permeates its way through the whole organisation.
Yeah.
More holistic, like you said.
Exactly. And I think innovation, like cultural change, is a marathon, not a sprint, and you need all the pieces to come together, and that can take time, particularly when your most valuable resource is your people, and they're the ones that are going to be, more or less propelling the innovation efforts. So you published a book on creativity and engineering, David. Do you want to tell me a little bit more about what Horizon 3, blue sky innovation, as you've called it, means for engineering companies?
Yep. So I published a book last year on, as you said, on creativity in engineering, and that was, an opportunity for me to really bring together the two sort of strands of what I do, which is this creativity and innovation research that's heavily sort of psychological in nature, but also put that in the context of my day job, so to speak, which is teaching, undergraduate and postgraduate engineers. And I mean, I find one of the things that disappoints me a little bit, and I think it's quite pervasive throughout engineering education, is that there's sort of a vague awareness that we need to be teaching people about creativity and innovation. It's an important part of engineering design and problem solving. But it never really gets beyond we'll put a bit in this course in first year and assume that takes care of the problems. And relating this to engineering firms and the discipline of engineering, every year in Australia there's a graduate outlook survey where companies are surveyed about what they want in engineering graduates versus what they're getting. And what they want, in the top 5, is always creativity and problem solving in terms of what they want. But those things are always much lower down the list in terms of what they feel they're getting from new graduates. And it's clear why that's the case for engineering firms, as much as any other kind of firm. And that's because they understand that they're not in the business of bolting together pieces of metal or soldering electronic circuits together. Fundamentally, they're in the business of solving technological problems. And so the first sort of level skill that you need is the creativity and the problem solving, followed by the engineering skills. But I find there's a lot of really exciting problems and projects and so on out in the engineering world that graduates are getting involved in. So it's a discipline, although it's kind of maybe we don't do a good enough job of selling these exciting problem-solving projects that are taking place. But it's really a discipline that anybody who's excited by problem-solving and technology. There's all sorts of opportunities, for example, in clean energy and other projects like that are all engineering and all problem solving and creativity.
Yeah, and I think we definitely need to see a coalescence between creativity and the engineering and the technical skills. I mean, we're seeing a massive push now from the federal government in Australia for more STEM education. But some might say that teaching kids or university students STEM or the technical skills without the lateral, creative, and critical thinking, the problem-solving skills is essentially akin to a football team, without a quarterback, an army without a general, or a ship without a captain. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, it's an excellent point, and it really goes back to what we were saying earlier about a holistic approach again, or like what I was saying about the innovation phase assessment instrument. It's another issue of you've got to be able to do the right things at the right time, or you have to have the right skills for the right phase. And that means that sometimes you need to know your mathematics and your physics and so on as part of an analytical convergent process. But equally, there are other phases in the process where you need those divergent problem-solving skills, and that's the problem and you've just explained it in the context of the federal government's initiative with STEM. I talked about it a moment ago, in the engineering discipline, that it seems to me that both in engineering education, in universities, and even with this latest initiative about STEM from the government, that there's maybe too much emphasis on the analytical part, on the the scientific, mathematical, technical knowledge, which is important, of course, but needs to be supplemented by these other sort of softer skills in creativity, innovation, and problem solving. And so my point is, of course, it's not that both are important. So it's not that we don't need STEM skills, and it's not that we don't need creativity skills. We need both of them together, and there tends to be this overemphasis of the convergent analytical skills at the expense of the divergent thinking and so on.
Yeah, and I think a classic example of that is, Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. One brought that critical thinking, the problem solving, the vision, whereas the other brought the engineering skills. And I think together, at least in the early days of Apple, it was a beautiful marriage.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the point, that it's neither one is more important than the other. It's having both of them together, and it goes back to these graduate surveys of companies that's kind of what they're crying out for, because they know they have no trouble hiring people who've learned mathematics and engineering and all the equations and the technical stuff. There's queues of people who've got those skills, but the differentiator that makes some of those people useful for engineering firms is the ones who've got the problem-solving skills and the creativity and innovation. So, and that's the piece that's often missing. Yeah,
and I think it's going to be critically important going forward. We have the stats have been released from the Committee for Economic Development of Australia saying up to 60% of jobs could be replaced by automation in the next 10 to 15 years. And so, teaching today's youth that those critical skills, those problem-solving skills, so that tomorrow when they're our leaders, when they're heading up companies, they can do a better job at creating new value rather than just keeping the existing value ticking over.
Yeah. I mean, it goes back also to what we said about the 70-20-10. There's still that combination. Whether jobs are being replaced by robots or not, there's still, at the very least, going to be the 20 and the 10 parts.
Correct.
That are the high value-adding parts that keep our economy ticking over and that give the robots something to do in the future as well. So, we need to make sure that we're still coming up with those next generation solutions to the problems that we've identified, to keep the sort of juices flowing in the system.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, David, so I wanted to move towards I wouldn't say that hasn't been fun so far, but the more informal part of the podcast, where I ask you 3 questions, 2 hypotheticals and 1 on just lifestyle, which I ask of all my guests. So the first one is, if you could work for any company at any stage of their company life cycle, who would it be and why?
That's a good question. I'm not sure if I avoid naming a particular company, but I mean, what I would like to do and what I enjoy and find a lot of fun in doing is that front end stage of problem solving. And when I've done technical things myself, so aside from the creativity research and so on, I feel that that's what I'm good at and what I enjoy. I'm not a sort of fiddly detail person, but I like the challenge of identifying a problem and then coming up with all sorts of different diverse ways that you could actually potentially solve that problem. And then I'd be happy to just hand those over to somebody else and say, right, here are the ideas, now you go and sort of drill into the detail of those. But so if I could find, my dream job would be working in some organization at the front end of the process of the really sort of raw contact with the customer, identifying problems, and then coming up with the diverse range of solutions. Now, I don't know whether that means that people listening say, oh well, you should be working for Google or whoever, but whatever company, whether it was technological in nature or completely sort of unrelated, whether it's solving social problems or other types of problems, I like that front end part of the problem solving process.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to say you would like to work for IDEO, if that's the case.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good example.
Yeah. Fantastic. The second question is, if you could ask anyone a question, dead or alive, who would it be and what would you ask?
Oh, also a very good one. Yeah. I don't know. Well, I'll tell you what. On the theme of creativity and innovation, I guess I'd like to go back to, there's a guy, probably the father of the modern creativity era, is a guy called J.P. Guilford, who was a psychologist who was studying intellectual ability and so on. And he's the first person who actually, had this idea that human intellectual capability is more than just the convergent stuff. It's more than just being able to answer, 2 + 2 = 4, but that it also extends to this idea of being able to generate different solutions to problems. In other words, thinking divergently. So I'm not sure, I'd like to sit down with him and pick his brains. I'm not sure exactly what the questions might be, but they'd be around, the psychology of creativity and problem solving. And understanding, sort of getting inside his head as this father of the modern creativity era.
Yeah,
so I know I've dodged your question again a little bit, but I hope that's satisfactory.
You've half answered it. I don't know if it's fully satisfactory, but it's okay. It's possible. And the final one is just around lifestyle design. You've written a few books. You've done a lot of work in this space. And a question I ask everyone who's doing awesome things, kicking goals, is how do you stay on top of your game? Do you have any rituals, routines? What does the normal day look like for David Cropley?
Yeah, okay, well, this one I can be a bit more specific on, I guess. We mentioned earlier about the rowing and so on, and I've found that having a kind of serious sort of physical activity like that has been, necessary and helpful. One of the reasons why I took it up in my mid-30s was, I was starting to get into a role at work that was more sort of, demanding in terms of time and interacting with people, more of a management role. And I think I felt that, I needed to be doing something just to, to have a space that you could get into that was completely away from that and helps you de-stress and relax. So, I enjoy, and I like competing as well. To me, that makes it easier to sustain a physical activity. I think if I just went jogging each day, I'd get bored with that. But having competitions to look forward to and so on gives it a bit more of a purpose for me that sort of drives me along. And so, the exercise is important. Rowing is also great, particularly out on the water, because once you're out on the water, it's like you're in a castle surrounded by a moat. Nobody can touch you. People can't walk up to you and interrupt you and so on. As long as you don't crash into anything, you're kind of out on the water in a single scull boat by yourself or with a few other people. But you just you've got a task at hand that you're kind of concentrating on, and it just gets you completely away from telephones and email and other stresses and strains of life. The other thing that I do, just to finish that off, is about 2 years ago I also got a stand-up desk. Now I've got one of these that sits on top of my desk, so you can raise and lower it very quickly and easily. And I find that's good as well, because it gets you up on your feet a bit more during the day at work. But also I've found that some of the things I do, I prefer to be standing up when I'm doing. In fact, like during this conversation with you for the last half hour, I prefer to stand up. So I'm on the phone now, but I'm actually kind of wandering around my office, standing up on the phone. And I find when I really have to concentrate, say, writing, working on a book or whatever, I prefer to stand up and type that. Whereas there are other things that, are okay for sort of sitting down. So I think just being on your feet more, walking out of your office rather than telephoning somebody, just trying to stay active during the day is very important as well.
100%. And I think a few things you touched on there, being out in the water in your moat's essentially surrounded by water, you've got no interruptions, which is more likely to get you in that state of flow, which, as you'll appreciate, is important for creativity. So you've probably had lots of ideas come to you while you're out there rowing, as opposed to when you're in the office and surrounded by all the demands and pressures of life.
Yep, no, it's a good point, especially when you're rowing on your own. I've had that experience a few times where you suddenly think, what happened to the last 10 minutes? And, you realise you've just drifted off into thinking about something else, and, the time slips by, and then I've kind of stopped myself and thought, hey, that's flow. That's what it feels like. And so, it's nice to be able to do that.
Definitely. Okay, so where can people go to find out a bit more about yourself and your books, David?
Well, there's several possibilities. If they, of course, if they Google me, then I think I'm probably the top David Cropley on Google. Not that means very much, but if they also look, search for the University of South Australia's website, and then you can, I've got a homepage in that. Probably also another good site that most of your listeners would be using is LinkedIn. So again, if they look for me on LinkedIn, they'll find some information there. And I'm very happy, if people want to follow up on anything that we've talked about, they're more than welcome to get in touch and send me an email, which you can find on the sites I've mentioned, or send me a message on LinkedIn, and be very happy to talk further about these things.
Perfect. And you should also know I'm the #1 ranked Steve Glaveski on Google as well, and I think that's probably because I'm being the only one.
Having a slightly unusual name.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time today, David. I'm sure our audience will get a lot of value out of that. And enjoy the rest of your day.
Great. Thanks very much, Steve. It's been good to talk to you, and I hope your listeners found some value in it as well.
I'm sure they did. Thank you so much. That's it for our show with David Cropley. Hope you enjoyed that. Don't forget, for more information on Future² and to subscribe to the podcast mailing list, you can head to future².xyz. We'd really appreciate it if you took a minute to like us, subscribe, or share us via iTunes, Stitcher, or SoundCloud. And as always, don't forget you can download a free copy of my book, The Innovation Manager's Handbook, at www.theinnovationmanagershandbook.com. If you've got any questions on the podcast, shoot them across to steve@collectivecamp.us or find me on Twitter at Steve Glaveski. Until next time, Future² out.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat with Jake Knapp and John Zaratsky. I had an absolute blast talking to the guys, and it was, of course, a first time interviewing two people at once here on Future². But I don't know, what do you think? Do you think I did okay? I think it was fine. But anyways, if you are picking up what I'm putting down here at Future², please take a minute out of your day to show some love on iTunes. Maybe leave a 5-star review, share the podcast, maybe do the same on Stitcher and SoundCloud. I don't know how much time you have, but that would be great. Nonetheless, as always, if you want to find out a little bit more about Collective Campus, the innovation hub, school and consultancy that works with large companies to help them better explore disruptive innovation, then head over to collectivecamp.us. We've got a star-studded array of guests coming up for you. I'm not going to tell you who, you're just going to have to wait, but I cannot wait to bring you some more guests. So if you don't want to miss out on that, just subscribe on iTunes or Stitcher. So until next time, Future² out.